the session. Sir, first things first, thank you very much, sir. Raghuraman, sir, it's a pleasure to always hear you. And thanks for so readily agreeing to actually spend time with us today. It's really a privilege to hear you out on this topic. I've heard you on this earlier. Yes, it was a wonderful learning session for many of us. And I look forward to this session today. Thank you so much. Gentlemen and ladies, to introduce Mr. Raghuraman, I mean, I don't know if he really needs an introduction for all of us in the state of Karnataka specifically. He's our very own Mr. Raghuraman, designated as senior advocate in December last month. Heartiest congratulations once again for that, sir. He is very regular in Supreme Court and High Courts. Just to share with you, the Calcutta Club case that we talk about on the principle of mutuality was argued by him. It is one of the landmark rulings that many of us keep discussing in a lot of contexts. On the academic side, sir, I am not wrong if I say I am very jealous. There are at least almost all of us on this call today will be envious of your academic profile. He's a ranker in both CA and CWA. He's a fellow company secretary also. He is very regular in addressing various seminars. He is a visiting faculty for IIM Bangalore. He has authored quite a few books, which all of us, I'm sure, will be reading. So, I mean, I don't think he needs Mr. Raghuraman by himself. He's known. It's known. We don't need to really say anything more. Thank you so much once again for agreeing to spend time with us today. The topic today, as all of you will know, is about the rights and privileges of the taxpayer, the role, functions, and duties of the tax officer, specifically when it comes to assessments, search, seizure, the inspections, maybe the movement of goods. All these, wherever there is an interaction or a communication that happens for us as taxpayers. What is our rights and privileges? Because a lot of times these questions come up, saying, they come at 3 o'clock in the afternoon for some inspection. It goes on till 3 in the night, or maybe uninterrupted. It goes on for more than 24 hours at a stretch. There's a truck which is stopped. The invoice number, there was a small minor error. Things like that. In all these cases, what is a right that we have? What is a privilege as a taxpayer I have? Then at the same time, what is it that we should expect from a tax officer is something that he's going to help us understand so that we are better equipped given the assessments, the inspections, the various other forms of proceedings which have already begun under the GST law. With that small introduction for today and Mr. Raghuraman, I leave it to him from here. So thank you once again, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Badriji, for your very flowery introduction.
Sir, it is your humility to say it is flowery. It's actually factual, sir.
Thank you. See, this I'm so happy to be addressing the BCIC, which I think I must have spoken sometime back in the past.
Yes. Last year, same time, sir.
So it's not very far off, I think. So after being designated as a senior, I think this must be my second or third talk that I am giving, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So I'm very happy that it happens to be in Bangalore. Unfortunately, I think my first talk was not in Bangalore. Yeah. I was thinking, Karnataka would be the first, but it so happened I had accepted.
Also, I think they wanted to replace because that is.
Yeah. So these things, once in a while it happens. I'm not unduly bothered about it. Some people will have their microphone open, at some point of time. We have a rather very interesting topic, I would say, rights of and privileges of the taxpayer and functions of the officers, which often, seems to be the other way around. With the tax statute, when we see, it looks as if all the rights and privileges are vested with the tax officers, and the obligations are cast on the assessees. It is high time, that the government of the day made a charter in each of the statutes. It cannot be prescribed by way of a circular. It should be in the statute, where they recognize that the taxpayer is the king. The taxpayer has to be respected. We've seen the present dispensation, the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister actually state so. But that should percolate to the bureaucrats, that it is their taxpayers' money which they are getting as salary today. So you please tell me who's the master and who should be the servant. Is that happening? That's all we need to look at and see. Is that happening today or it's not happening today? The answer is an obvious no, because we see that the tax collector seems to be in a much better position than the taxpayer. We are seeing it time and again that, tax collectors taking the taxpayers for granted. And especially in the GST regime, this has become a complete rules of assessment, rules of recovery have been completely given a go by. This is one of the things that now we need to address. And this session, we will try to see what really is required. What is there and what is required. Now, what does the taxpayer want? Let's face it. What is it that the taxpayer, either income taxpayer or the GST payer, what is it that he wants? Only two things. He will pay the tax. He has a right to be left alone. Two, his refunds will have to come in time. These are the only two things that are required for any taxpayer. Right to be left alone and the right to a refund in time, especially the exporters. So now we will have to address this question. Is the right to left alone being actually followed or not? Is the right to refund, early refund, being followed or not? Only two questions we'll have to answer. And then we will know whether the rights are there or privileges are there. In practice, the rights and privileges have they percolated to the taxpayer? What is said in the statute, has it come down to the taxpayer? Unfortunately, my answer in the GST regime is a no to the fact that neither is the taxpayer being left alone, nor is his refunds coming on time. Now, these are things which have improved over the period of time as far as refunds are concerned in income tax as well as the GST regime. Substantial improvement has been there over the years. But fact of the matter is that more often than not, I find GST refunds being withheld for some reason or the other. And the latest trend of the department to do assessments, dehorse the GST legislation, is something which has been hurting the GST taxpayers. When I say dehorse assessment, this is what I mean. To take a simple example, most taxpayers over the last 1.5 years have been facing this problem of the IT assessment, that the 26A is being taken out, and the GST authorities straight away send the show cause notice to the assessee, asking him why he has not paid taxes, as there is a difference between the 26As and the GSTR 3B and 1 which they have filed. The simple question here that we need to ask is this. And this is the question which I asked in the Karnataka High Court to the Revenue. Are you doing an assessment under the GST law as per Income Tax Act or as per the GST law? If I have filed GST returns and you have found nothing wrong in them, You're not questioning them at all. How can you go to some 26A statement or income tax statement, which is filed under a different law for different purposes, and straight away issue a notice saying that these two don't tally and therefore you have to pay so much tax? How can you do this? Have you checked whether, as a tax officer, often I see they are supposed to do the checking, but the assessee lands up doing the checking. This is something very peculiar. We give them all the statements and then they will get back to us and say that this does not tally, that does not tally, and they will not even understand. Fortunately, in this matter, I got a stay from the Karnataka High Court on the simple ground that the assessments will have to be done keeping in view the CGST provisions and not the income tax provisions. Fortunately, we also had a Madras High Court decision which had almost spoken in a language similar to that. But fact of the matter here is, we need to see in all these matters that are coming up, we need to check and see all the time what are the rates that we have, what is the liabilities that we have, what kind of privileges that we have, as also what kind of duties the tax officer should do. So in this session, we will see what is it that we should do. The first thing we should understand is that we all know Article 265 of the Constitution says that no tax can be levied or collected save the authority of law. But what we should also understand is when they say save authority of law, law would mean a law which is reasonable. We cannot have an unreasonable law and collection of taxes. Collection of taxes necessarily has to be without pinching the taxpayer and through a law which is reasonable. If you look at what is a reasonable law, then the tenets of Article 14, 19 and 21 will have to be read in to each law. Celebrated case of the Supreme Court in Maneka Gandhi's case, which said law means something which is reasonable. When they interpreted Article 21, they said procedure established according to law would mean a law which is reasonable in nature. You cannot have an unreasonable law and implement it. Now, if you look at why I'm telling you this is simply when a tax officer takes an action against you, the first thing that you should see is under which part of which provision of law he is taking action against you. And against that provision, you will go in and see whether that provision is reasonable or unreasonable. This is the first test that any taxpayer should do, because he has a right to a law which is reasonable. Please remember, that is the first right that you have. You have a fundamental right to a reasonable procedure. You have a fundamental right to a reasonable law. And therefore, if the law is not reasonable, the high courts and Supreme Courts are there to challenge, saying that the law is not reasonable. A simple case I will give you a couple of years back before the COVID, when arbitrarily the input tax credit ledger was blocked by the department. The assessee never knew about it. But when he wanted to adjust the input tax credit against his output tax payable, he could not access his his credit ledger at all, and he didn't know why. He went to the department, and the department screen, it shows it has been blocked. And when they asked, he said, no, we have blocked it. No reason, nothing. And immediately, therefore, there is what is this? next to be done. So you read, the taxpayer has to see what is this 86A and whether it is a reasonable law or not a reasonable law. 86A does not even give you a right of hearing. Right of representation is not there. And any law which does not give the citizen a right of hearing or denies him a right of representation is an unreasonable law. Because it doesn't stand to reason. Any ordinary man will act in a particular way. But if the law says that I will not give the citizens who are taxpayers any hearing or any representational rights, that law becomes fallacious. Therefore, we went to the High Court and we could convince the High Court that this 86A has certain ingredients. And unless those ingredients are invoked and communicated to the taxpayer, the question of there being any recovery or blockage of credit cannot arise, because blockage of credit means my property is withheld. Input tax credit ultimately is a property. And if that property is withheld without adequate reasons, the citizen, the taxpayer, has a right to go to the High Court and claim that his fundamental rights have been interfered with. That is why emphasis is very much placed on established by law means a reasonable law. So the taxpayer should know which provision of law is being invoked against him and whether that provision of law is reasonable or not. There are two things. The law itself may be unreasonable, like 86A. Sometimes the law will be reasonable, but the action of the authority will be unreasonable. And this happens very often. This happens very often. Today, you see, today I had a matter before the Bombay High Court. You just see the facts of the case and you will laugh. And this is happening throughout the country. The DGGSTI, the Great Intelligence Wing of the department, issues a summons. The person attends the summons, gives all the details. Department finds that there is maybe a tax liability of 11 or 12 crores. And what do? Instead of computing the taxes and issuing a show cause notice, the department tells him, we are going to arrest you. If you don't pay, we'll arrest you. This is what is happening in the country whenever there is a shortfall in revenue. Between the months of December up to March, the assessee has to be on guard, very carefully on guard, because every other day there will be an intrusion into his privacy, intrusion into his business by unwanted interference by tax authorities. The fifth case, we went to High Court, and it so happens the High Court itself was surprised. What, in spite of so many decisions, here is a case where there is no notice issued, there is no assessment done, there is nothing given to the assessee. Tax sought to be recovered. In all these such cases, fortunately, we have the courts which have been indulgent and have always protected the taxpayer. In these cases, very clearly the high courts in the past have held that you should not have recovery until you finalize what is the assessment. But what worries me most is that in the earlier regime in excise or customs, arrest would be done after an assessment is done and a prosecution is launched. But under the GST regime, arrest is done first so that the person will pay. I've never heard of this, but that is happening. Therefore, what are the rights of the citizen? What happens tomorrow if they threaten arrest? Big businesses tend to buy peace. Some amount they will pay and defer. Is that the right thing to do? In my opinion, this payment of tax during the course of summons is a completely wrong signal that you're sending, not only for you, but you're sending the signal across the country to all people. It's a signal by the tax authority that he can recover amount as he wishes without even doing an assessment, just by threatening him. The businessman's problems, the businessman's anxiety is well understood. We can't say no. Tomorrow, if these people really go and arrest him, what happens? At that time, it takes 3 or 4 days, 5 days, and this corona happening. It is very difficult to get him out within few days' time. So therefore, the anxiety that a businessman has is something that has to be addressed. And the tax department tries to utilize this for the purpose of getting money. Unfortunately, in doing this buying peace with the department, you are actually empowering the department to go after each and every other assessment. Because they know if we do this, that man will pay. So 2 options that you should disclose, you should always go with in such cases, where you must understand the nature of the case which you have. If the nature of a case is an interpretational issue, is something related to valuation, something related to classification, something related to maybe whether it is taxable or not taxable, a transaction. These kind of cases, arrest can never happen, because these are cases where by nature it is interpretational in issues are involved. Take for example, whether landowner has to pay tax on developmental rights or the developer has to pay. These are all interpretational issues. On these kind of issues, an arrest generally never happens. Generally. But take the other kind of cases where e-way bill is not there. Nothing is going to happen except tax payments. There will be no arrests. Tax below 5 crores, there's not going to be any arrest. Certain other types of cases where input tax credit is fraudulently taken, or you have dispatched goods without invoices. These are the more serious cases where arrests can happen. So the first thing the citizen should, and the tax-paying assessee should note, and their consultants, what is the kind of case? If it is the serious type of cases which I told you, input tax credit fraudulently taken, or what they call a circular trading and other these kind of things, arrest is likely to happen. But in the former cases, arrest is unlikely to happen. So even if the authority threatens you with arrest, you can nicely tell him and get out of it. So this way, this right which you have to weigh it carefully. First, you determine the type of cases, determine the amount of tax. Your right against arrest is fundamental. The right to arrest is not fundamental. Right against is because liberty of the citizen is protected. Even the courts are slow in arresting a person. Even if you go to criminal court, unless the cases are serious like fraudulent invoice or dispatching goods without invoice and some such things, in all other cases the courts tend to take a view that if this man has been in the let us say he has been in Bangalore for the last 20 years, doing business for 20 years, he's filing income tax returns, he's filing GST returns, paying taxes, the court is normally inclined to give him bail. So in these kind of cases where arrest is apprehended, assuming you can even go for an anticipatory bail, or you can examine whether anticipatory bail can be itself obtained. In the less serious cases, it is fairly easy to get an anticipatory bail because the judges take a very balanced view. The criminal courts in the country take a balanced view. They don't rush into this. In the high courts today, if you see the number of cases that are coming, slowly are taking a view that after all the period of imprisonment in GST matters is only 5 years. Dowry deaths, which is 7 years itself, have protection from arrest in 41A of the Criminal Procedure Code. If that be the case, why not for GST offences which are less in terms of imprisonment? 5 years is the period. So this factor also you will have to keep in mind when you exercise your rights and your privileges. And when you do so, you will know that fine, in these cases, arrest is not possible. So even if it threatens you, you don't bother about it. You just go ahead with the statement making and don't even worry about it. Often I tell my clients, you have a right against arrest. The word arrest is only, and section 69 is invoked only for the purpose of frightening you, so that you'll make some payment, or you'll do some silly thing, or you'll tell some statement which you don't know, but in the heat of the moment you tell something, you accept something. Arrest is used for only these purposes. So you have a right that even if it says arrest, please divide your cases. You will know where you fall and get out of it. If you feel that there is if you feel that your client is having a good case, but in spite of that, because of ego issues, the officer is going to arrest him, the best thing for you to do is to consult a criminal lawyer and see if you can take a anticipatory bail, because that is also a right vested in the taxpayer, not to be arrested. In a fit case, he should not be arrested because jail is an exception while bail is the rule. You have seen certain reported cases, but all of these cases where there has been an arrest and detention, you must understand that those are the very serious cases where it has been done. For every one serious case that is reported, there could be 3 or 4 which is unreported and which is just, there is no arrest made at all. So the proportion of arrest is actually much less than the proportion otherwise. So this right, which valuable right of life and liberty which you have under Article 21 is well protected. Even the power of arrest cannot be done just like that. It has to be shown prima facie what is it that the person has committed. And therefore you could have to advise your clients accordingly, or even the persons who are affected by this can make a division of their cases and analyze accordingly. This is one valuable right which you should exercise with care and caution, because it is something which will not only affect your business, it will affect the other person's business also, and empower officers when they need not get empowered. The written law is always much superior to the IT infrastructure that is put in. Kindly understand that a bulk of our litigation that is going to come about in the future, as I anticipated a couple of years back, and which is going to happen, I feel, is the difference between what is in the law and what is the IT infrastructure. There is always going to be a difference in the IT infrastructure and IT systems and the law that is prescribed. The typical example of 86A I told you. IT enables people to do things quickly without following a procedure. The law says you should follow a particular procedure. So every citizen of the country, every taxpayer should carefully examine this, whether the IT infrastructure that he is using in this GST is backed by the law. If it is not backed by the law, you should take immediate and remedial steps to ensure that the IT infrastructure will fall in line with the law. Arbitrary exercise of powers happens because procedures are not followed and the IT infrastructure allows that to happen. These overriding powers which are given to officers will have to be checked. If they're not checked, businesses will see their credits being blocked between January to March on every year. This is going to be a fashion. Unfortunately, GST collections are good and therefore you don't find too much of harassment. If it is not there, if the collections are dipping, not satisfactory, you will find a lot of harassment happening, as has been the case several years back. So please understand, the future of litigation in GST will be the mismatch between the IT infrastructure, the IT system that is there and the law which is prescribed. And this mismatch can cause authorities to function in a way different from what the law requires. And all this has to be remedied only in the judiciary. No amount of representation will make a person change a system unless you force him to change it. And you can force him to change it only when you show the judiciary the law. And then the change, you take a simple example of what is happening. Transitional credits which were taken in 2017, it may be surprising to note that even though we have won the cases, till now, the website has not been opened. Forcing certain high courts to actually tell the assessee, these guys are not opening the portal. So you take it in the GST or 3B straight away. Take the credit there. Let us see what happens. I read a decision yesterday saying since they don't open their portals and their electronic system is virtually closed, please take it in your 3B directly and then see what happens. But this could not have happened unless an assessee went to the High Court and forced the arm of the executive. So your right to a credit, your right to a relief, that valuable right you must exercise at the earliest point of time. Please don't leave it thinking that the officer will be upset or the officer has requested you to do not to take credit. These are not valid grounds for you to not take credit. Whenever you have to approach the courts, please don't hesitate because that is an exercise of your right. Then you look and see whether that right which you're exercising is recognized by the courts or not recognized by the courts. Sir, can you put yourself on mute, sir? Thank you. Now we come to inspection, search, seizure, where you have a lot of action normally happening in the direct taxes, indirect taxes, everywhere, all taxes. Inspection, search, seizure. What are the rights you have against? Can they walk into your house and hold you to ransom? Can they simply walk in and hold you to ransom? This happened in Gujarat. I was there in the High Court, though I was not representing the case, when the arguments were going on in respect of one such case a couple of years back, where the officer had walked into the house of a businessman and spent 24 hours there, much to the shock of the courts. Why the courts were shocked? Reason is they had no respect for the rights of the ladies who are running the house. They're sitting there for 24 hours. This is the extent to which there was invasion of privacy. And the courts did not leave it. They took it very seriously. Officers had to be present in the court to explain and face contempt. Contempt is one power which the courts have, which the assessee should tap carefully. Let me tell you, nothing works better than a stick. When the contempt power of a court is invoked, the officers become very, very, very wary. They're very careful. So that right is with you to invoke the contempt when they do not follow the orders or they do something very heinous, as to go into a house and sit there and try to recover a tax. That is not permitted. Had the assessee not challenged it in the High Court, he would have suffered it. Inspection, search and seizure should be only with reason. The first thing that any assessee should do, let me tell you this. When an officer walks into the house or office, the first thing you should do is to ask him for his ID, that you have a right to do so. Because you don't know who's coming to the house. Maybe a competitor, his security person disguised as an officer walking in, and this has happened just a week back. Where the transport vehicles were stopped. Suddenly some three people come and then, stop this vehicle, ask for e-way bill and invoice. E-way bill and invoice is produced, but they still say this is deficient, that is deficient. Transporter doesn't know what's going on. So if the transporter doesn't know what's going on, what is he going to do? He's going to talk to the officer and say, Acha, why don't you release this? I will pay you something. That man decamps with the money. And after some time, it was found that the people who came are all private persons. They are not at all inspectors or officers. No such person exists. This is a serious issue. So the first thing that you should do, you have to tell your security guards, the people who walk into your office or walk into your house, who are they, with ID cards to be produced. That is your right. You have a right. Even if it ticks off the officer, but that is a valuable right you should exercise to ensure that you do not lose heavily in the future. Have all your CCTV cameras working well. Ensure that any official who walks in, inspector, whomsoever it is who walks in, CCTV cameras should be working. wherever they go. There should be no misuse of power. Unfortunately, I find some assessees doing it, some assessees not doing it because they themselves have a lot of things to hide. If that be the case, it's a different issue. But here we are speaking of law-abiding corporates, law-abiding citizens. Please keep your CCTV camera footage carefully because we need to know if these guys are really those officers, even if they produce an ID card tomorrow. We need to know that we have certain safeguards put into the process before a person comes for inspection, before a person comes for search. You should know whether the person coming is from the department or not. It's a valuable right which you have. You shouldn't squander away that right. If you do this, the next step you should ask is, why do you come for search or seizure? Unless the officer has a reason to believe, he cannot come, he cannot walk into any place and seize the place unless he has reason to believe. And this terminology, the courts have interpreted to show that in the file there should be a clear recording why the search or seizure has taken place. Many a time we find searches and seizures being quashed by the courts on the simple ground that in the file we can't find anything which shows why a search was done, why seizures were done. Nothing is there in the file. Just it comes out of the whims and fancies of the officer. He doesn't like somebody who has not given him what he wants. Search. Whether previous sanction of higher authorities is available in the file should be seen. You may not be able to see it, but when you challenge the proceedings, the court will see it. It's a valuable right that you have under 67. It's a valuable right. Don't give it up. Challenge it. Find out what reason they came. Whether most of these require a higher officer to sign and say, yes, search has to be done. And if that is not there, the question of if proper authorization for a search and seizure is not there in the file, the courts will say that this seizure is illegal. And that is a good and valuable right for you. When a summons is issued, you are under a duty to attend under Section 70. But when you attend under Section 70, this is the safeguard. What the officers normally do is straight away issue summons to the CEO, straight away issue summons to CFO, directors, because they know they will take a decision on payment. In all such cases, you can advise the company that an authorized person can go. The CFO or CEO need not know day-to-day transactions. Authorized person who knows should go. And when he goes, he should answer in such a way, only what he knows he should answer. If he does not know, he should keep his mouth shut and come back. Valuable right is given that when summons is issued, only the authorized person needs to go. It is not necessary. They will call. They will say, we are not happy with your answers. Call your CEO, call your CFO. We will issue summons. No such thing is necessary. You can clearly write back to them saying the CFO and the CEO will not come. In the context of the earlier excise and customs law, in fact, the circulars have been issued very clearly in service tax also, clearly saying you must not summon higher ups. Please don't do it. As a matter of course, you should not summon them. Only if you find something serious, irreconcilable issues that you need to summon those people. Otherwise, it is not a mandate. Keep this in mind also. It's a useful safeguard that before any of these summons are issued, you should know who in your company is capable of answering and send only that person who is capable of answering. Now when we come to refunds, refund is one thing which has always been an issue between the officers and the taxpayer. We need a provision like 153 of the Income Tax Act in the GST Act, a compulsory provision, that if refund is not given within a particular time, punitive interest should be paid. Not just interest, punitive interest. If you don't follow the orders of the higher ups, punitive interest should be paid. If you see 153 of the income tax, specifically, even though you have 6% is the rate, but giving effect to orders, it can go up to 9%. 3 extra percent is given to the taxpayer, ensuring that the tax officer will pay the refunds in time. But in our GST law, such a provision is absent, except if it's a direction of the appellate tribunal under 56, we have some limited powers. Limited. The general law which we should push for is that if something is attained finality, refund should come out within the next few months. And if it does not, punitive interest will have to be. I hope the GST law one day has this concept of punitive interest. That will push the officers to tone up the administration and ensure that the refunds come in time of issues which are already settled in favor of the assessee. Refund is a very valuable right. As far as possible, you tax plan in such a way that you don't go for a refund, but it is inevitable for exporters. They survive on refunds because when they costed their products, they would have taken this refund into account. That's how they can get a competitive quote across. It's a very valuable right, and if this right is frustrated or delayed, working capital gets affected and cost of doing business gets affected. And we see most of the businesses having this problem. If you look at the parallel provisions in income tax, the administration there, if you look at it, virtually up to 7 or 10 lakhs of your refund amounts are credited almost within a month, 2 months. 2 months of you filing the returns, you get the credit. Lower the figure, immediate credit. So one should have such a provision in the GST law also. If you have refunds up to a particular monetary limit, it should be granted. And then you do all your post-audit, whatever you want. Small assessees who pay, you have this 90% rule of disbursement, but on some pretext or the other, the bigger refunds are held up. Sometimes they give 90%, sometimes they don't give. You should have a uniform law. You should divide refund amounts up to so and so should be granted automatically. And then you do post-audit recovery, that's a different issue. In my view, the refund provisions of time limit of restricting, for example, the valuable right of refund has been considerably read down in the Supreme Court decision in VKC Footwear's case. Unfortunately, an enabling provision has been interpreted to be a disabling provision. The provisos, which are actually an enablement of refund, have been read as a disablement of the main section. Unfortunately, the government should not wait for court cases to settle and then, deny the refund. Transitional credit matters and inverted duty structure refund matters, we have found the government being very, very, very frugal in their approach. I am putting it very mildly. It is in these matters that you should show largesse. Inverted duty structure doesn't come only because of inputs. It comes also for input services and capital goods, one of the things that was never argued in the courts there was that if it is accumulating on account of inputs, input services and capital goods is automatic. It has to accumulate. There's no other way. That is why the law talks of on the inputs and on the input side and the output side. If it is accumulating on account of inputs, input services and capital goods is automatic. So, but these are all valuable rights, which what I'm saying is the government should not wait for court cases to come. They should settle the issue with the trade. Grant of refunds should be seen as a way of doing business. You have announced several PLI schemes, production linked incentive schemes. Why not even the refund under GST is the best production linked scheme I have seen. You export, you get refund. It's like a PLI scheme. Implement that properly, you will have businesses coming into the country. You don't require anything other than that. Train your officers to concentrate on issues that are material. Immaterial issues should be given up. Immaterial issues, please give it up. So if your refunds are denied, what do you do? Now, because if your refunds are denied, necessarily it may take a long course of action of 2 years or 3 years to settle it. Doesn't mean you should not challenge it. You have a valuable right of refund. Every refund you have already incurred it. You have already built it into the costing when you did your pricing for exports. If you don't get the refund, it's a loss. If you don't get the input tax credit, it's a loss. It's a business loss. It is a straight hit on the profit. And therefore, this valuable right, you must go to every extent to protect it. You must ensure that you fight for the refunds. That is one of the most valuable rights which is there with the taxpayer and should not be given up easily. And if you see the provisions of law, especially in the indirect taxes, interest has to be paid within 3 months of the application. If it is not paid, it is automatic. If you see Ranbax's decision, Supreme Court said it's automatic. If you have not given him the refund, that's it. Interest accrues from that date. As much as if you have not paid the taxes over the last 5 years, interest will accrue for 5 years. If the refund is not given within 3 months of application, from the date of that expiry of 3 months up to when they give refund, interest is payable. But this is where the government plays truant. They cleverly try to avoid this interest payment. You should be very careful as a business or corporate house and see whether you should fight for this or not. In many cases, I find the interest works out to 30–40% of the tax amounts. That's a huge amount. That is not that. It is not that you have not incurred that cost. If you had got it 5 years back, that amount is your working capital. The interest is payable to you. Please don't waive the interest. Don't tell your advocates to waive the interest. Tell them to collect it. Fight for it. How much you get is different, but you should fight for it. You should fight for the interest. Don't give it up. I find many assessors giving up the interest claim and instructing us, please don't press for interest principal, let it come. It's a good thing if you're hard up for money, but if you can wait a little more, fight for the interest. Don't give up that valuable right which you have of claiming interest. It is after all a cost which you've already incurred. So don't give up the interest costs. Having spoken something about the rights which are available to a assessee, I would also touch upon what is important to be followed. Constitutional rights are effaced. Go to the courts, high courts and Supreme Court. Matters of interpretation is involved. Please go through the departmental proceedings. Adjudication, first appeals, second appeals. Of course, now today the second appeal is not effective because you don't have the GST AT. The appellate tribunal is yet to be set up. But that is the route, I can tell you, should be followed for 80% of the cases. The balance 20% of the cases where the rights, fundamental rights or other statutory rights are trampled, there you go to the constitutional courts directly. As far as possible, avoid the authority for advance rulings because it's a shortcut method and the adjudication which goes on is not pakka, is not good. Advance ruling, you have revenue people sitting. The appellate authority for advance ruling, again, revenue people are sitting. You can't expect any order which is unbiased. And when you go to High Court directly from the authority for advance rulings as a writ petition, and it happens to be matters of interpretation, it becomes very difficult unless the courts are used to adjudicating GST matters. It becomes very difficult to convince them. So in all those cases, it's better you avoid an advance ruling and wait for the dispute to come and go by the departmental dispute route, which you have done in the service tax days. Please follow it in the GST days. Don't give up this right of appeal and shortcut it and go to advance ruling because it may turn out to be worse for you than had you waited. There is a tendency for us to say, let us complete our things quickly. Let us get a determination of the tax liability quickly. We should not keep the Damocles sword hanging. Sometimes, the Damocles sword which hangs in tax matters is made up of material which evaporates. So it's better for you to wait. A flex of time, the material of Damocles swords evaporates. And after several years, you will find nothing is left of the sword. Invariably, if an 80–90% of the cases before the tribunal gets decided in favor of the assessees. So if you wait it out, you will have good grounds to fight. But if you go early, you may not have enough grounds. You may be in a hurry, but it doesn't sort out your problems. You should keep that in mind also. Functions of officers. Whatever I'm going to tell you of functions of officers is theoretical in nature. It is followed by default. Very few officers, there are some exceptions always in anything. Very few officers actually go out of their way to help the assessees, knowing fully well that their salary in the ultimate analysis is dependent on the well-being of the taxpayer. But the role of an officer is that, and the rights of the taxpayer are all intertwined. The officer is supposed to do your assessments. An assessment means he should know the law. Yes, today, the GST, what problem we have is that the state government officials are used to the assessments under the sales tax, while the central excise and service tax officers are used to an adjudication proceedings, not the typical assessments. So there is a mismatch between the way these people do their work. This has to be streamlined and equated. The orders that come out of the sales tax persons are completely different from the orders which come out of the central excise or service tax officers. You are going to find this more and more in the coming years as assessments or adjudications start. The way they do it is completely different from how the adjudication is done by the central excise officers. This has to be streamlined. 2. An officer is supposed to follow the law laid down by the higher courts. And do we find that happening? Many a time, I will tell you, many a time we have got to go to the high courts to tell the High Court that a binding decision of the court is there and the officer is refusing to follow it. There is a binding decision. I've had so many cases of faceless assessments which they have handled in the income tax regime. That settled issues settled by the Supreme Court are not being followed. Matters settled at the jurisdictional high court levels are not being followed. That means the taxpayer has to fight for these things. And the tax authority is not discharging his duty properly. His duty is to assess the tax properly, and he is bound by judicial discipline. High court decisions have to be followed wherever it may be, unless your jurisdictional high court has a different view on it. Every other high court decision will be binding on that issue, especially if it's an all India legislation interpreting the law. So therefore, these officers generally do not follow decisions if it doesn't suit them. And this has become one of the bone of contentions between the assessee and the tax authorities, because they do not follow settled law. They will wait till it reaches the Supreme Court to finish there, and after that apply the law. Till that time they keep it alive. This is a very bad practice that is followed by several authorities, especially in the central regimes. Until a contempt power is invoked against them, they tend to assume that they can get away with it. We should keep a record of how many cases are booked by the officers and how much succeed. If this record is kept, the government will know which officer is foisting litigation on the assessee and which officer is actually doing his job. 2. Officers should follow the principles of natural justice. And today, if you find, out of every 10 cases that are filed in the high courts, 7 are filed because the officer has failed to follow the principles of natural justice. He has failed to perform his duty. The assessee takes 5 grounds. The officer looks at only 1 ground which suits him and confirms the amount. Other 4 grounds are not even looked at because it doesn't suit him. He can't discuss, he cannot distinguish. Some officers go one step even better than that, and they say, the assessee has quoted several case law and we find that none of this is applicable in the instant case. No discussion will be done. These kind of matters are also taken up to the courts and set aside. We find that the role that the officer should play ultimately is to encourage the assessee to pay more taxes, but in a way, as our Chanakya said, you should collect the tax as the bee collects honey from a flower. You should not destroy the flower. You should collect it so carefully that the flower will remain intact and you will get whatever honey you want. Tax rates at 18 and 28%. Of course, I know that in the European community, tax rate of 20% in UK is there. Some are even lower. I'm saying the average tax rate. So an average tax rate of 18% is quite okay. But if it goes beyond the 28, 40 and etc. and compensation cess, it becomes a burden. So the tax administrator should, as a rule, ensure that the tax rates are reasonable, and then you will have complaints coming in largely. 4th, taxpayer should be treated with respect. The moment a taxpayer is treated with respect, the tax officer probably will find him complying much better. Mutual animosity causes a lot of taxes to go down the drain. Neither the government will be able to collect immediately, nor will the egoistic taxpayer leave it, because it's a matter of ego. And even the government official has larger ego than the taxpayer. So this leads to litigation. Rather than that, if the taxpayer were to follow, tax collector were to follow a different method, where he is courteous to the taxpayer, he may find, okay, out of 10 assessees, 2 people will take advantage of it. But 8 assessees will actually find the regime comfortable and comply. This is something which has never struck the government at all, or it strikes them only for 9 months of the year. The last 3 months they become recovery agents. I have found the tax collectors, commissioners acting worse than loan recovery agents. I'm really surprised that high officials who are entrusted with the duty of tax collection should behave in this manner. A manner which clearly shows they have lack of training, lack of knowledge. There are some officers who are wonderful, but they get dragged down by the many officers who cannot get the tax out of the assessee in a way that is non-abusive. Let me put it that way. We need a standard guideline to be followed. The tax administrator should put a standard guideline in respect of each type of activity that they do. This should be done throughout the country. Summons, how it will be issued, what should be done. Recovery of taxes, how it will be done throughout the country. Assessments, how it will be done. Adjudication, how it will be done. Some sort of a step-by-step procedure which everybody should scrupulously follow. Training for the officers on issues. What is the GST law? Training for them. Because the GST law is an amalgam of several laws. Excise, sales tax, your service tax, something from customs. They need training. So the training has to be given. Harassment of taxpayers. This is one of the things which has always been on the top of my mind. Harassment of taxpayers, especially when the tax revenues are not up to the mark, is something which the taxpayer should guard, the tax collector should guard. Why I say both? The moment they harass and you pay up something to accommodate them, please understand, to take back that amount will be almost impossible. So that is another aspect of the law which both these taxpayers and the tax administrators should take care of. And I find that tax administrators go for short-term solutions. Between January to March, they want to collect tax. From April onwards, they relax. Taxpayers also are like that. They get used to something for 9 months and then last 3 months they struggle. One of the things that taxpayers tend to do, and which is one has to be careful, is that they tend to delay payment of taxes. They say, if I borrow from a money lender, banks are not giving loans. So if I borrow from a money lender, it would be 20%, 25%. I will pay 18% to the government and borrow from them. Please understand, if these borrowings from the government exceed certain limits, you can go to jail. You collect the tax and not pay, it's a serious offense. You can be prosecuted for the offense. This is another thing that the assessee should be told. The consultants should specifically take out section 132 of the GST Act and read it out to the assessees who come. They have to be careful about the non-compliance which may cause them to get into prosecution. Yet another thing that the department has to do and they don't do is the e-way bill system. The law has been changed from January 1st to levy a penalty, but if you look at the newly inserted rules, they are draconian in nature. They go against the very provisions of 129 and 130. The e-way bill system, let me tell you, free movement of goods means they should be free. You can't have so many case laws floating around on e-way bill. Just 2 days back, because the truck took a different route in Gujarat, the Karnataka traders case, he was penalized. And it had to go to the High Court. The Gujarat High Court had to remind the officers that, here, man, what is this? You're not following the law which we have laid down. Just because a person goes in a different route doesn't mean he is, evading taxes. Another aspect of the law where requires a lot of attention is you are going to find more and more tax collectors attaching the bank accounts of the business on some pretext or the other. Safety guidelines have been laid down by the Gujarat High Court. In spite of saying that cash credit accounts cannot be attached, we have in Gujarat itself the commissioners issuing orders attaching cash credit account. And now he is hauled up for the contempt of court proceedings. Recovery of taxes, let me tell you, by attaching bank accounts does more damage to the tax department than to the business. If he is not able to collect, he will not be able to pay. If you attach his bank account and keep it there, God knows what he will resort to tomorrow. Most unwelcome method of doing, doing tax collection is attachment of bank account without rhyme or reason. And we have found so many cases on Section 83 today. And they amended 83 to make it worse. Earlier, proceeding had to be pending. Now, if you initiate a proceeding, you can attach the bank account. We are going to have a lot of cases being filed on this attachment of bank accounts. It's a very unwelcome procedure, but which is rampantly being used by the tax authorities across the country, in every state. I would seriously think that both the assessees and the taxpayers, especially the tax administrators, should ensure that they do not attach the bank accounts of the assessees, which leave them with nothing else to do but to go to the courts and get relief. Interface of information with other departments is welcome. You can check evasion, no doubt about it, but you should know the law first. As I told you in the beginning of my speech, just taking the 26 AS and then telling the assessee to give the difference shows that you don't know anything about it. You have no knowledge about 26 AS. You don't have any no knowledge why there's a difference between income tax receipts and GST receipts. You want to pass the buck. This passing of buck by the department has to stop somewhere. Therefore, I hinted at the beginning of my speech, a charter will have to be compulsorily laid out in the law, not by way of executive instructions, in the law. You should have a schedule to the CGST Act, laying out charter, what you will do, when you will do, how you will do. If this is laid out in respect of each important provision of law where there is an interaction between the assessee and the department, there will be a reduction of litigation in GST. Otherwise, we will have GST litigation exceeding the income tax litigation by several 100%, several 100%, not 100%. So therefore, I feel that if assessment adjudications are done without knowledge of the law, if bank attachments are done without following the law, if judicial discipline is not followed, if natural justice is not followed, the e-way bill system is not used as a way to collect money, litigation will reduce substantially, and we will concentrate on core issues that are a matter of interpretation. So these few words, I thought I will share some of my thoughts on how the rights and privileges of the taxpayer should be exercised. At the same time, how the department should also exercise their powers in a way which will ensure that tax collection happens at the minimum interference. And I reiterate, even now, there are only two things that the taxpayer needs. He wants not to be disturbed, and he wants easy refunds. Now I take this back to Mr. Badri and his team. And if there are any questions, I would like the participants to ask me.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. It's echoing. One second. Just disconnect. Thank you so much. Sorry, it was your own voice. Just 1 second. You've connected. Thank you very much. It's very wonderful, sir. Quite a few things to actually take away. Some of the punchlines I would say is something which will register in quite a few of our minds for days to come. Is jail is an exception, bail is the rule. Thank you so much. I think there is a lot of weight in that one statement for a lot of people to actually understand. Sir, you also shared your experiences in terms of how the assessments or these proceedings are carried out. It's more like the attitude, the approach of the tax officers. Sir, in all this, there is one thing that the department definitely follows without a doubt, which is basically the principle of mens rea. That is very clearly and loudly followed in almost all the proceedings. I think that is where probably I wouldn't say a shift in the thinking, but a small correction in the thinking will be required to actually feel the experience of what Chanakya said in what you said. Unless that mindset not changes, a small correction is done, what Chanakya said will never be a reality.
Correct.
That's one thing that we have to. Sir, while you were telling, I got a lot of messages from the audience here. It is when you said role of the assessing officers, you said one thing is they should know the law. Second one is they should follow the law laid down. Third is they should follow the principle of natural justice. Fourth is taxpayers should be treated with respect. Sir, some of the messages I've got, it more or less says, sir, these are all oxymorons.
You see, I'll tell you an interesting anecdote. I was arguing a case in the Karnataka High Court, and the judge told the opposite, the Revenue Council, you should treat the taxpayer with respect. I will give stay in this matter. You can't treat him with disrespect. Don't you realize that our salaries are coming from him?
That's, those thoughts do come.
Saying, if there are changes happening slowly.
Sir, those thoughts do come, but they are like bubbles. They last very.
Our effort should be that the bubble should become the sea in a period of time.
I agree, sir. I agree with you.
What else can we do? See, we have to do that. That is our role. That is our role, and that we should do.
Absolutely, sir. One other learning definitely for all of us is aspects that we should know that can be challenged. One is the reasonableness, the second is the timelines, third is the identity of the officers coming. Very important. I'm sure many of us have made note of it too, in terms of how to communicate, how to deal with the situations when we are in the midst of something like that.
See, what happens is, I find one of the things is we should have a proper PRO in each company who can deal with this.
True.
Who can communicate.
True.
If that communication skill is there, all these people will voluntarily produce their ID cards.
True, sir. Very true. Very true. Very true. Very true. Very true. Sir, I'll put it this way, sir. Not to take away too much of time. I keep telling this to my team also a lot of times. There is a way to speak. There are two boys who are sitting in the church and suddenly have a craving for having some liquor. So they go. Both of them. One of them goes to the father and says, "Father, can I drink while I'm praying?" He gets a tight slap. The other one goes. He asks, "Father, can I drink while I'm praying?" So he says, "Son, it's a very noble thought." So it all depends on how you ask your questions. End of the day, the objective of both the boys was same.
Correct.
Sir, I'll just one question for you. Sir, in the assessment related provisions, the proceedings wherever, 61 to 65, where the heart of the GST is, when we talk about the kind of proceedings that can be carried out. So one of the important things is, the opportunity of being heard is not a right. For want of better words, let me say it is a privilege. I should ask for it. It is not a matter of right. If I want, I should ask. So is the case in Section 61, which is scrutiny of returns. Section 65, which is audit by the tax office. I can understand this provision in respect of non-filers. I can't understand or appreciate this in respect of Section 64 also, which is summary assessment. Sir, any thoughts on that?
See, I believe, even in the audit functions, appointment of auditors, I think the principles laid out by the Supreme Court in Sahara India firm will definitely be applicable here. If you want to have adverse consequences taken against an assessee, the law has to read natural justice into it. You can't say that I will not call him for and he has to opt. See, this is what is happening with the challenges to 144B of the Income Tax Act, that is your faceless assessment scheme, which we're challenging. We are saying you can't say that if you want personal hearing, you'll opt for it. You must
definitely, that's how it is, sir.
I think it will be read in. In my opinion, it has to be read in. I can understand if the guy has not filed a return.
True. Section 62 non-filers.
Yes, non-filer, or he's simply not responding to your assessments. So best judgment you want to do under 64 or wherever. There is a case where in spite of opportunities he's not responding. There I can understand, but not for regular assessments which you want to do, or regular scrutinies where you want to take an action adverse to the assessee. And then I think natural justice will have to be read in.
Sure.
In fact, 86A also, if you look at it, there is nothing there of natural justice there, but Madras High Court has read it into it. In the recent judgment, Madras High Court has said you have to read natural justice into this. You can't simply block a man's credit.
No. Sure. Sir, maybe one last one before I check if anybody else has questions. They can raise their hands or start posting their questions in the chat box. Please feel free to do that. Sir, one is in many of cases, as a taxpayer, I am told what to do, what not to do, how I should behave, what I should do, what I should not. There are penal consequences attached to what I do or what I don't. But so is not the case as far as the officer is concerned. While we say it is good, it's a good practice for the officers to do this. It is not expected of an officer to have done that, etc. It is only theoretical. Sir, all of us have heard saying there is immunity for all the officers as far as their role is concerned.
Protection of action in good faith.
Yes, sir. There's some 2 minutes on that, sir, from you.
You see, protection of action in good faith means there is no malified. But let me openly tell you, the only consideration that happens in his mind is promotion. I find 80% of the officers worried about promotion and using, high-pitched demands as a means to get promotion. So the issue is not with the office, the issue is with that administration. You have to define how you will, you look at corporates, how they, you know, probably deal with their employees in terms of rewards. How do they reward them? Are you doing the same thing in the government? You're not doing so. You don't have that system. He has, you see, it is like this. He has got used to the crutch. He's not going to give it up. For him, you can't send him out of the government employment once he is employed. Okay. So this kind of attitude, do you want him to be assessee friendly or executive friendly? It's a self-serving system. Somebody has to come and, you know, overhaul this completely. And if this doesn't happen, you know, then you are not going to, all these reforms which you do will simply go by the wayside. The faceless assessment scheme is a brilliant scheme. Let me openly tell you, it's a brilliant scheme. And how do they derail the process? By fixing high-pitched demands. Let me tell you, one of the matters which I took to High Court, the turnover, not profit, the turnover of the company is 3.5 crores. The additions are 122 crores. How can you make an addition of 122 crores to a turnover of 3.5 crores? You're making capital additions. It's impossible. If this is done to ensure that the faceless assessment scheme will die a death. You see the mismatch.
I fully kind of agree with you, sir. Faceless assessment, I wish corrective action is taken and it is here to stay.
If it is here to stay properly, let me tell you, it will work very well.
Absolutely, sir.
And you will not have this aggrandizement and this, greasing of palm business. And we can do our work from the office. We don't need to go anywhere.
Very true, sir. Very true. Very true. I mean, it will be a wonderful experience.
Absolutely.
I mean, it'll take the GST, the good and simple tax to the next level. Frankly.
Absolutely. It is. I have a feeling, at some point of time it will happen. If you look at the refunds happening today in the last 2-3 years, it's much better than when, maybe 7 or 8 years, 10 years before.
True.
So any process in our country probably is taking 2 decades, but I'm hopeful that it will happen in some way or the other.
True, sir. Just one more thing, the one more line which is kind of registered from your speech is nothing works better than a stick. Not many people like me because I also am a believer of that. But yes.
It happens. I have seen it happening in courts that the contempt power works much better than persuasive power.
Absolutely, sir. Absolutely. In fact, I was at the court when one of your cases was happening. This was in respect of service tax where costs were awarded on the officer. I mean, I was there for a different case. But yes, I heard you. It was wonderful. In fact, yes, I wish we get to see a lot more so that there is some seriousness in the implementation of the law, the administration part of it. Yes, sir, on the chat box, yes, it goes what I was telling. Excellent talk, very knowledgeable speaker. Hope we'll have another session. Yes, we'll make it. We'll take the, we'll look at his convenience and calendar and make it happen. One more person says, overall, the GST has given an impetus to the business and economy. Your concern is that act has to be administered judiciously in letter and spirit. So, anything you want to say on that?
Absolutely, I completely second his thought. In fact, your collections, I will not be surprised if your collections go up to 150,000 crores constantly if your economy picks up so well. And that can be done only by, keeping your hands away from the businessman. You'll always have exceptions. You'll always have people evading taxes. But if you look at I'll tell you some figures which may surprise you, especially in the income tax. It is like there are hardly 4 lakh people who are paying taxes of 20 lakhs and more in this country. Actually, if you see, 1 or 2% of the taxpayers contribute more than 60%, 70% of the tax. It looks as if, the income tax regime can be simply given a go by. and you can replace it with an expenditure tax at some time, and you'll get probably 3 times the amount.
That is what one of the newspaper article reads yesterday.
Right. That's what I see. No, that is the kind of figures, that we see it. We find it I think, the salaried class should be simply taken off the radar.
The other thing that is in the news now from a budget expectation is, I don't know how true, but yes, this is on the social media, is that the standard deduction is likely to increase to ₹1,00,000, the basic exemption limit, etc. So that actually reinforces what you said. 1% is paying so much of the tax. That only moves in the same direction.
The standard deduction, raising it by 20,000, medical premium raising it by 10,000. This kind of reforms, I think we should stop here. We should not look at this kind of reforms which are of no use to anyone. You should look at, taking the salaried class completely off. You will find them, you see, today's salaried class, I'm telling you, are 30 years, are different thinking than you and me.
True, sir.
They spend more.
True, sir.
They spend
very
more.
True. Very true.
If you take out the taxes, they will spend more. So you will get more GST coming in.
Yes, so true. So true. Yes, sir. Those are the comments on the chat box. And yes, those are some which I wanted to just share as punchlines, as something for us to remember. So thank you so much. It was wonderful interacting with you as usual. Quite a bit of learning for us and digest. And yes, as one of them has requested, I will be in touch with you for another session sometime, maybe in February. I will bother you for that, sir.
No bother.
Thank you so much.
It's my duty.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, sir.